What's up, guys? You ain't got Buns here, and today I want to answer the question, why is Elden Ring so good? Now, I spent about 40 hours and over a week getting the research for this video and editing and everything, so please like if you guys enjoy and subscribe if you want to see more. It would seriously mean the world to me. And also, as this is my first video, please let me know what I could do better in the comments. I decided to make it because it's always been a dream of mine to be a successful YouTuber and be in a position to help people and be a voice for people without a chance to speak up for themselves or help themselves. So I decided to give it a shot. And with the release of the Elden Ring DLC coming soon, why not make a video about why I have such a strong opinion on it? But without further ado, let's answer the question. Why is Elden Ring the best game ever made? The biggest factor, in my opinion, for Elden Ring's success is due to how beautifully crafted the game is, from the small visuals like the grass, trees, and rocks to the extremely complex towns and areas. Each detail of Elden Ring has extreme in-depth detail and no cut corners. If anything, they took corners too wide, and that just deepens the experience more. This level of perfection Miyazaki and FromSoft have created helps enhance the immersed experience of Souls games, to even greater heights than previously reached before. I've spent weeks playing Elden Ring without a single complaint about the game. The only feasible complaint I've come up with is me being dog shit. This is by far one of my favorite aspects of the game because the story of Elden Ring is possibly like one of the best stories ever made. Now, for anyone considering this a stretch, you like Game of Thrones? Who made the books for Game of Thrones? George R.R. Martin. Now, George here teamed up with the late great Miyazaki, and they created this thing called Heaven, aka Elden Ring. You may wonder what makes this story so damn good. Everything. The story is beautifully crafted with an extremely in-depth history, of which we haven't even seen most of yet. The story matches perfectly with the game in the sense that you never go somewhere and don't have a sense of the story going on around you, even if you don't care much about stories in games and mostly avoid them. It also has an extreme amount of detail, which is awesome for the amount of content the story holds. The story goes into very deep detail of all of the demigods in the game especially, which reveal much of the main story as you fight them. But each demigod has its own lore, backstory, unique area, and most have their own boss fights. But even the ones who don't, like Miquella and Godwyn, are clearly a huge part of the story, more so Miquella than Godwyn. Combat is a major feature of any game that has a combat system, especially when it comes to Souls games, and just like everything else in Elden Ring, the FromSoft team absolutely nailed the combat system and experience. The combat system has more weapons, more classes, more unique movesets, and better movement than any game I've ever seen, including the other Dark Souls games by a mile. And because of the varied playstyles and movesets, from each weapon, the combat never feels bland. Rather, it feels like a breath of fresh air from the amount of choices and variation left to the player. All weapons attacks in this game also have specific scenarios where they shine out of the rest. This was a clear issue and complaint in past Souls games because players would just press R1 through the entire game. For example, in some boss fights, a player may fight a boss like Godric, who is a more grounded and easier to hit boss with attacks from a standing position. However, when fighting bosses like dragons or falling star beasts, you have to jump attack them in order to hit their heads, which are their only weak spots to deal any significant damage, while also significantly lowering their poise. Poise is not something I'm going to go too deep into for the video's sake, not being too long, but in short, it is a hidden stat that all enemies and most bosses have that can be slowly worn down with light attacks, but much more efficiently with heavier attacks or some weapon arts. But so when an enemy or boss's poise reaches 0, the enemy falls to the ground and is open for riposte. Ripostes are critical attacks that deal an insane amount of damage, which can be even further amplified by certain weapons with a high critical stat. I also love how Elden Ring caters to the player's combat experience fully. Regardless of what class or weapon the player enjoys, it is never impossible to use, no matter how far in the game, and it is also always a very enjoyable and well-rounded experience. Elden Ring's replayability ties in partly to the sheer size of content the game has to offer. There is a never-ending amount of quests the player may choose to do, bosses the player may choose to fight, and plenty of new areas, puzzles, and unique enemies to see as well. Elden Ring also has a ridiculous amount of story to find throughout each playthrough, and also has the greatest story of a game you will ever play. But along with all this story is an endless amount of hidden lore, whether it be voice lines from different NPCs or statues standing around the map, or the similar designs of weapons and clothing in the same area. Also, when you're in the menu, clothing and weapons also reveal lore about where they come from and bits to the story a lot of the time, so make sure to watch out for those. Now, the main reason Elden Ring is known for its insane amount of replayability is the 6 different endings the game has to offer, all stemming from what the player decides to do throughout the entire game. These are also just the 6 known endings. There are possibly more, but we don't really know. These 6 endings also revolve around extremely powerful gods in the story, and all end with that character slash god becoming the last god left. Water break! Get you a water break at home too, folks. Stay hydrated. Now, anyway, there are a lot of gods in Elden Ring, by the way, like a ton. Some which are much stronger than others, but they're all pretty strong in their own right. Elden Ring has a ridiculous amount of content, and the map is absolutely huge. The map itself, off a rough guess, is bigger by about 6 times Dark Souls 1's map, and 3 times Dark Souls 3's map, with both of them having DLCs included and not including Elden Ring's upcoming DLC, which is said to be about double any DLC they've ever done. Take this with a pinch of salt because it's not 100% accurate, but just a rough guess. And throughout this massive map, you are met with an endless amount of free will no matter where you go. Want to start a random quest? Go ahead. Want to mercilessly slaughter a shit ton of monsters? Go ahead. Want to follow one of the 10 paths that split off the main path? Go ahead. Whatever choice you make, there are going to be tons of items regardless, and always a very enjoyable outcome. There are also 238 fucking bosses. God damn! Granted, some of those bosses are repeat bosses, but at least even the repeat bosses generally have a cool twist to keep them entertaining. It is seriously astonishing how full of content Elden Ring is, yet there isn't any lack of detail on any part of this massive map. Elden Ring also has 300 unique weapons compared to Dark Souls 3's still very impressive 200 plus. There will also be more of all of these things in the DLC, obviously, including weapons, weapon classes, bigger map, obviously, more content, more story, just more content in general. Elden Ring is chock full of vastly different areas to explore and secrets to find. There are currently 13 different regions in Elden Ring, which include Caelid, Landau, Limgrave, Altus Plateau, and many, many more. There are also plenty of very cool areas underground, like the Shofar Riverwell and the Nokron Eternal City. Throughout these areas, you can choose to explore and search for secrets, or just simply take the main path and book it to the boss fight. Whatever your cup of tea is, Elden Ring has the area you're in planned for it. There are so many small secrets to the lore, like the lore of the place you're in, or the lore of the enemies in that place, and the bosses there as well, and these are all around the map. These secrets and the underlying mystery going on throughout the game is a wonderful way to keep the player exploring and having a fun experience consistently through the game. This element of mystery is a huge part of Elden Ring's appeal, in my opinion. Due to the amount of mystery surrounding many characters and their backstories in the story, which are main characters and very important bosses that you tend to fight, you truly want to explore those areas that they're in and find out more about the lore around them. For example, one of the most intriguing characters in Elden Ring is the character with the most mystery, Miquella. There is hardly anything known of Miquella besides he was beloved by all, was a twin of Melania the Blade of Miquella, and he got kidnapped by some random dude. However, even with all the mystery surrounding Miquella, he is still one of the most influential characters to how the story of Elden Ring came to be. This creates an overwhelming question as to what all Miquella is capable of, how he ended up where he is, and why he did the things that he did. It's things like this that truly entrance the player into wanting to discover more of the map and the secrets encompassing the map. If there's anything to compliment about Elden Ring, it's how much of a huge forward step the game was in terms of Dark Souls games as a whole. Elden Ring has by far the most content and the best features of the other Dark Souls games, plus new features of its own. For example, a major complaint of all Dark Souls games is the run back to a boss fight. Elden Ring, for the most part, fixed this issue with the implementation of Stakes of Marika. Stakes of Marika allow the player to spawn directly outside of a boss fight opposed to at a campfire and being forced to run the whole way back. Another thing Elden Ring has improved is poison swamps. Now, poison swamps are still in Elden Ring and they are still not very fun, but at least now they contain a far bit of actual content opposed to being completely empty. There are also many other ways to traverse these swamps better than there were in previous games. Elden Ring has also heavily improved upon their boss fighting areas. I felt in many past Souls games it was a very common and annoying thing to be constantly fighting the boss and the area you were in, but when it comes to main story bosses in Elden Ring, I would say there isn't a single poor boss area. The free roam bosses around the map, however, normally don't have the best arenas, but they aren't ever too bad. Speaking of bosses, Elden Ring has improved much on them as well, as many of the bosses I found myself fighting in past Souls games felt as if one move was the only reason I would be struggling, or the boss itself was much more a gimmick than a fight. Generally, all bosses now have balanced movesets that all challenge the player opposed to dying to the same move over and over for an hour. The exception that quickly comes to mind, Malenia. Besides Waterfowl Dance, I don't think Malenia is hard. But what's worse than dying 100 times to one move over and over? Chasing Mikolash's ass through 1,000 hallways every attempt. Now when it comes to downright gimmick fights like Mikolash, Elden Ring has none. Every fight is well earned and you don't feel cheated or feel like you cheated in the vast majority of fights unless you are under or over leveled, which is just on you. It's really on me because I can't feel good about myself unless I'm at least 5 to 10 levels under the boss. Typical sadistic Souls player just looking for even more fucking pain, but I'm sure you understand where I'm coming from with that. These updates to the quality of life of the Dark Souls games as a whole make Elden Ring feel like such a higher quality taste of a game, you know? It feels like Elden Ring has just perfected everything and done everything right that the other Souls games had, on top of adding on its new things that have made Elden Ring Elden Ring. Boss fights are by far the main reason Souls games are so well known, to which only makes sense that the biggest Souls game has the best boss fights, the most boss fights, and the most badass boss fights. Spoiler alert, that's Elden Ring. The boss fights of Elden Ring do a great job showing how terrifying the bosses are and what strength they're truly capable of. Each boss fight has astonishingly beautiful effects and designs, as well as arenas to go along with the beautifully designed boss inhabiting it. The bosses are all a fair challenge, some more so than others, but none feel overly difficult or overly easy, besides the bosses that are meant to be overly difficult or easy, like the first available boss, the Beastman of Fair Missoula, which is very easy, and Malenia, whom is very difficult. These bosses all have extremely badass outfits as well as movesets and weapons, my favorites being Radahn's outfit and the lamest boss with one of the coolest weapons, which is Godric's Dragon Arm, which the players themselves are also free to use. I would also like to express how well Elden Ring's difficulty of bosses is crafted. It is completely up to the player whether they want a harder or easier playthrough due to so many bosses being optional, which is a great thing. You can either over level for bosses too hard or under level for bosses too easy as well. I think, however, regardless of being under or over leveled, fighting the bosses at the recommended level is still the best experience because the player experiences the ups and downs of the fight more thoroughly. I find this the best experience because the bosses are so well scaled in difficulty. The bosses never feel as if you stand no chance whatsoever unless skill is an issue or you're underleveled, but never feel too easy unless you're overleveled and have some experience already in the boss fight. This is going to be a very small section just going over little features that I feel greatly improve the quality of life in the game, especially comparative to other Soulsborne games. The first one being the much better movement of Elden Ring. One example being the Stakes of Marika I spoke of earlier, but more so the horse mount and ability to jump. Obviously, these mechanics play very well in an open world, but being able to jump like you can in Elden Ring and truly traverse areas vertically like this has long been a dream of all Souls players. Another is the bell bearings. Bell bearings eliminate the need to go and search endlessly through multiple different playthroughs even just to upgrade a couple weapons or obtain items you need a lot of, and would in turn be forced to waste much more time farming. Smithing stone bell bearings are specifically the best because you can spend much less time scavenging the map for random smithing stones in the hopes of finding the ones you need. They also provide the player with an infinite amount of items when given to the Twin Maiden Husks. This is probably the best quality of life feature in the game in my opinion, either that or Stakes of America. They also eliminated a lot of the clunkiness in the older games, like for example Bloodborne was it was a very good game, but it felt very weird in boss fights, like the rolling and the locked on system, how you could just sidestep didn't feel very good to me. And same thing with DS3. DS3 was better, but the rolling didn't feel nearly as good as Elden Ring's does. But it still was very good though. So, in conclusion, what makes Elden Ring so mo-fucking good? Everything imaginable. The game is a true masterpiece and I recommend everyone gives it a try at some point. The only thing upsetting about the game is you can only play it for the first time once, but that is part of the magic. Thank you all for watching this far and I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please like and sub. Have a good day guys. Peace out.